Razor is extremely useful and flexible. Being able to combine HTML and C#
and have that all server-side rendered and outputted as HTML means that we can build powerful applications. Let's go through the different pieces of Razor and how that can be used in your MVC applications.
The @ is a directive and is using the implicit Razor expression. This will allow you to consume properties or methods and have that rendered as iHTML content. It will be HTML encoded. If we need to combine two different properties or the result of a method together with some other value, we can use the explicit Razor expression instead. The goal with this is also to evaluate this to generate some HTML content. You'll notice in the code here that I've added some comments. Razor, of course, also supports adding comments so that we can add an explanation of what our code piece is doing. You've seen by now that we've combined HTML with C#. This is called transitions. Most of the time, we use what's known as an implicit transition. This is the concept of combining C# code together with HTML. The Razor internal components will figure out where you're using C# and where you're using HTML. For example, the most common implicit transitions that you are going to use is for each, for, while, conditional if, else, and switches. These all start with the directive, the @ symbol, followed by, for example, a for each. If our view is expected to work with an IEnumerable of product, we could indicate that we want to use a for each loop to process each item in the model passed into our application. The model will then contain the instance of the type that we have defined that our view is working with. As we are now creating a block of C# code, we'd like to use some HTML. In fact, let's say that we want to calculate the price excluding the VAT. I'll do this computation at the start of the for each loop. And then I'd like to print this out, and I can open an H1 and then use the Razor implicit expression to indicate that I'd like to use this price inside my H1. After this, I'd like to compute the VAT. I could do this using an explicit expression, but to prove a point, I've introduced a variable that is now just containing the VAT. I can then use the Razor implicit expression together with an HTML tag to tell Razor that I want to transition into HTML and render this content. Sometimes you might want to output data that's not actually HTML and not surrounded by an HTML tag. This is where we can use what's known as an explicit transition. We can tell Razor that we want to open a text block. Inside this text block, we could add whatever type of text that we'd like to echo out to our HTTP response. We could also, of course, use the directive inside this text block to access properties or method. There's in fact a shorthand syntax to perform an explicit transition. It's using the @ symbol together with a colon, then followed by the text that you'd like to print out. If you'd like to print out an email address, you'd like to use the @ symbol. But since this is a directive and tell the Razor engine that there's now going to be some C# code, to escape this, we use a double @. This would allow you to then print the @ symbol out to your HTTP response. Razor supports conditional attribute rendering. If an attribute is using the Razor expressions, and that returns null or false, the entire attribute will in fact be removed. This saves a couple of characters from being returned from your website. And of course, since Razor supports the usage of for each, while, and switches, obviously it will also support using statements try-catch finally, locks, and other types like that as well.
I would suggest that if you'd like to learn more about the Razor syntax and what it can do for you, and some of the more advanced topics, consult the documentation. It's a very good resource to learn more about the syntax, how that impacts the rendered HTML, and how all of this works together.